I'm Professor Ben Bikman. I am a research scientist and professor of cell biology. This week is a bit different because I'm not discussing a particular topic, but rather sharing with you the good news that I'm happy to announce that my new book is coming out. The release date for the new book is July 11, and here it is. Now, you're going to notice some similarities in the title. My first book, which was Why We Get Sick, here over my shoulder, this is the follow-up, the companion book, How Not to Get Sick. Now, I want to just go through the book a little bit with you. When I first considered writing the book, Why We Get Sick, it was really because I thought I worried that there was a part of the medical conversation that was missing the main character, namely insulin resistance. And so by way of the kind of personal journey that I thought I might share with you, in the life of a professor, there's one achievement that stands out. You would think that when you're going through your PhD, when you're going through your postdoctoral fellowship, that the goal is simply to get hired as a tenured track professor. In reality, the goal is to get tenure. For me, once I got tenure at my university, I had an honest conversation in my office right here with myself. I was struck by what I worried was some of the irrelevance of academia, namely peer-reviewed publications. That as a scientist, the main metric of success, well, it's twofold. Am I getting grants to fund my research? But am I publishing peer-reviewed science manuscripts? Now, as a professor with undergraduate students, that's something that's important to me because I want to mentor these students and help them achieve their next professional goals. But if I'm being honest with myself, as all academics ought to be, as we all ought to be, I had to admit that these peer-reviewed papers really didn't do much to actually help someone's life. That the average individual would never read these peer-reviewed science manuscripts and would never have any benefit from them because of that. And so then I asked myself if my knowledge set about metabolic health and fat cell hypertrophy and insulin resistance as a key contributor to chronic disease, if it's valuable, am I not obligated to find a way to share it? And that was the beginning of not only my social media efforts, including Insulin IQ. You're watching this on the YouTube channel, whether it was Instagram or X or any social media platform, that was purely based and created from my desire to find a direct way of teaching metabolic ideas to people. At the same time, I realized that no one had written a book about insulin resistance directly. But in Why We Get Sick, I framed it in a few parts. I wanted the reader to become familiar with what insulin resistance is, where it comes from, so the origins, why it matters, so highlighting the diseases that come from insulin resistance, and that's the bulk of the book. And then lastly, end with what to do about it. So again, sort of 4 parts, a book with 4 parts. What is insulin resistance? Where does it come from? Why it matters and what to do about it. Now, the what to do about it part, the original version of the book, it was extraordinarily modest. I had very simple ideas there. And then the publisher, Ben Bella publisher, and my editor said, look, we got to put a little more meat here. Any of you who have connected with me for some time may have sort of learned my philosophy when it comes to implementing plans for addressing insulin resistance. And my general view is I'm a teacher. I'm a professor, and I love that job, by the way. I liked the idea, and still do, of being someone who can share ideas and share principles and then let you work it out. You decide how best to implement them. And that's what I did in Why We Get Sick. Now, however, some people want a little more than that. Some people want a little more direction, a little more specifics. That starts to put me, not only is it not particularly my strengths, but it also puts me in a bit of a weird position because I'm not a coach. I'm not a lifestyle coach. I'm not a nutrition coach. I'm not a personal trainer. And speaking of food and exercise, those are 2 things we're going to revisit in just a moment when we start talking about how not to get sick. But as much as I'm not a nutritionist and I'm not a personal trainer, I know a lot about those things. That's just not something I enjoy. That's not a role I want to play. I like being a professor rather than the coach per se. Does that make sense? It's kind of an odd dynamic here, and a frank admission of my own weaknesses. Nevertheless, after with the popularity of Why We Get Sick, there has been a lot of request for some specific ideas on how to take the raw science of where insulin resistance comes from and incorporate that into a more explicit plan of food and exercise guidance. That really was the basis for how not to get sick. Now, after everything I just admitted, you're thinking, well, Ben, you just said you're not a coach, you're not a nutritionist, you're not a personal trainer, and you don't want to be. That was why I brought on Diana. So I have a co-author on this book, which I am so grateful for reasons that I'll get into in just a moment. But this is a book of two parts, where the first part of the book is the hard science of revisiting insulin resistance and then helping you understand where you are at. And first of all, how you determine your own insulin resistance status, and then following that up with the scientific evidence supporting some of the approaches that we get into in the book. That sort of starts to finally get incorporated into how not to get sick. Like you can see some of the figures. In fact, in some instances, they're figures that I've recreated from talks that I've given. In this particular case, it's me talking about physiological insulin resistance and some of the myths and misunderstandings that come along with it.